Hello and welcome to EdTech Monday Kenya, a platform that enables key conversations on the use of technology, bringing together all stakeholders, including policymakers, EdTech entrepreneurs, parents, teachers, and learners. And you can let us know where you are following this conversation from, and also if you are picking any key messages from it. Today, our focus on the conversation is driving tech-enabled education. What lessons can we draw from the disruptive year that was 2020? Now, in March of 2020, President Uhuru Kenyatta suspended all learning in all learning institutions across the country, affecting over 15 million learners countrywide. And teachers, as well as parents, lost jobs. What did this mean? That there was more adoption of EdTech solutions or EdTech solutions for education. As a result of the challenges that we did face with education, schools being closed, and also the fact that access to technology was also a bit of a challenge, this occasioned by the digital divide, we now want to see how exactly we can pick up the pieces going forward. The future is now, education is now, and technology-enabled education cannot be ignored. Would like to hear from you. So I've got a panel of guests with me to help us have this conversation. And I have Isaac Nyongolo, who is the co-founder and CEO for Ziraki. I have Wairimu Magondu, who is the programs lead for Relearn, the education practice at iHub Limited here in Kenya. And also Joyce Mbaya, who is the founder and CEO at ZD. And we also have Rose Omolo, who is our sign language interpreter today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this conversation where we're talking about driving tech-enabled education and taking lessons from 2020. And because you're all entrepreneurs in the EdTech sector, this even makes this conversation more meaningful to have. So let's go over 2020 as a whole. It was challenging for education, and we do know education contributes over 2% of the gross domestic product to the economy. And the fact that education was suspended for so many months meant that not just the learners, but also the teachers and the entrepreneurs who are the school owners also suffered a great deal. But with the resumption of learning this year, what is the inevitable truth and what are the lessons that we can take out of the year 2020 that we can use going forward to incorporate EdTech into the education system? I'm going to start with Isaac. Isaac, you're going to take us through some of those lessons.
I mean, if you're thinking about 2020 and the unprecedented disruption in learning, and in some ways, 2020 is not a year that will be repeated, but there will be other disruptions that will be caused. It won't be by COVID, it will be by something else, and other countries in Africa have faced similar disruption in the past. So looking at 2020 and using those lessons to think about the future of education in the country, we know that disruptions will happen and we need to develop mechanisms to have resilience to help us survive such disruptions in the future. And EdTech becomes one of those critical tools to be able to continue learning when kids are not able to attend school. And these resilient systems are built, let's say, in peacetime, not necessarily in crisis. So that means that going forward, we need to have a lot of focus in developing EdTech platforms that work with existing, within the existing school systems during the school term, after the school term. And when these solutions mature, then it means if there's a significant disruption, the kind that was caused by COVID, then the education system is able to rely on this.
Wairimu, I'd like to hear from you. What are some of those lessons we've picked out from 2020 that we can use going forward?
Before COVID, there was such a slow pace to change when it came to education institution and education sector as a whole. But after 2020, we got to understand that things need to move a bit more faster than they did before. And this is the one lesson that each of us, be it the private education organization, be it the government, we need to start changing the education sector. And one big lesson from my end is teachers. Teachers are one of the major catalysts for education improvement in the country. And from my end, we need to train teachers on use of computers. And more than use of computers, we also need to train teachers on better methods or improved methods that will improve outcomes of learners and outcomes that fit the 21st century learner.
Joyce, I would like to come to you. You deal with businesses and also creating solutions for different businesses. What are some of those lessons we're taking out in particular for EdTech?
The inevitable truth, we were not ready. I mean, that's what we're all saying in one word. We were caught flat-footed. I think people treat digital learning, they've been treating educational technology as this nice to have optional thing. And now we know that's not the case. Now we know that it is inevitable. In fact, I say digital learning, which was previously sort of I can have it, I cannot, and now it's the norm. We have to think about it as the norm and accept that this is the way we are going to be learning now and in the future.
Okay, and so Wairimu, I'd like to come back to you because you did mention that there needs to be more focus, especially on the children, in adopting EdTech. So what measures did you observe being taken to ensure continuity of learning locally that worked? And some of those that you think would need more work to even work better? And also, were these the best options, that we had, or maybe we could do better?
We sought the easiest solution that we could get that teachers could continue teaching their students, and it was WhatsApp, because teachers have WhatsApp, learners have WhatsApp, and we started creating engaging and creative content and sharing with STEM teachers, that is science teachers, so that they are able to teach their learners. So to answer your question, measures were taken, and it's good because everyone was doing what they best knew in a pandemic that has never been experienced before. But I will not say they were the best measures, because we should have been more prepared. We should have not ignored EdTech as much as we have always ignored it and found it to be a secondary need or secondary want in our schools. So going forward, we need to embrace EdTech and know this is the future. We need to accept that teachers, learners, schools, they need to have EdTech in order to continue with learning in or out of class. At the same time, we need also the government to bring up measures and policies that will help the EdTech companies in terms of, for example, I'll mention KICD is in charge of content. So the content that is coming on right now, online resources, they cannot be evaluated the same way the books have been evaluated. So also the government needs to come up and bring better resources to help EdTech and improving education as a whole. Thank you.
Isaac, I'm coming to you now because from your interaction with the different learning platforms, I'm sure there's a way you can evaluate how learners, how teachers, how institutions are reacting towards these different platforms. Have you found yourself, let's say at Zeraki Analytics, in a situation where you now had to remodel some of your platforms to suit the current technologies available?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of the crisis, we thought of this as an opportunity to provide digital learning resources to the students. Mm-hmm. So we reached out through our network of schools. They were able to tell their students, you can access video lessons, you can access PDF-based learning resources. But a few weeks in, the teachers reached out to us and asked, how are we sure that the students are going through this material? How do we know whether they're downloading the resources? How do we know that they're using them? And that's when we realized it's not just about providing quality resources. It's about creating that channel where teachers are able to interact with the students. And again, it's something that we saw in many of the well-resourced schools. So whether that's high-end private schools or the national schools, where on the one extreme you have lots of national schools who are able to have full-day classes hosted on Zoom. And again, think about the resources both from the smartphones, the connectivity, And in the other schools, we would also, as I pointed out, see the interactions that was happening over WhatsApp. So there is this intense need for teachers not to cede their role to technology, where technology takes care of the day-to-day interaction they have with the students, but technology provides a way through which they can continue offering this interactive learning experience to their students, even when the students are away from school.
Right. Joyce, I want to bring you into this conversation because I'm sure there's some more you'd like to add on to remodeling the content for consumers. And I want to pose this to you. Given the infrastructure challenges that we do have, do you think there's going to be a time in the near future where we are seeing remote learning given all of these challenges that we just mentioned? Or do we have to now remodel our learning and be more inclusive when it comes to like the USSD code mode of learning, for instance?
It's interesting you've said that, because that was a big lesson for us as ZD. In fact, currently, one of our projects that's upskilling about 25,000 businesses across the country had to leverage USSD SMS technology. And we had to ask ourselves those questions, right? Because when we looked at the target audience of businesses, when we looked at their profile, we quickly realized that a lot of these businesses will not be able to, go online and watch videos. I mean, most of these people might be using feature phones. So you're absolutely correct. Already in that scenario, we know that we have no choice. In fact, we found it interesting that without the pandemic, these businesses would have probably been going into workshops, right? Going through face-to-face training. But now there's a situation where people are asking, we want this training to continue. People need these skills. What are the other options available? And the last thing I'd like to mention is something we're seeing now happening called conversational learning. So I like a quote that says, we need to bring learning to people and not people to learning. It means, how do you reach me with the learning exactly where I am at my convenience, and you make it as simple as possible for the learner to access what they need. So you push, we call it pushing content, right? You push content to me when I can be able to view it in whatever channel I'm comfortable with, even if it's social media, who knows? So these are some of the things we're seeing happening, but I don't think this is the future, Joy. This is the now. Like I said, this train has already, this ship has sailed. So we can't be talking about the future. We need to be talking about now and asking, how do we accelerate what the pandemic has already started?
All right, how do we accelerate? I love that. Wairimu, I want to bring you back because you did mention that there's need for training, because these gadgets have been distributed in some of the learning institutions, but they're not being utilized because some of the teachers do not have the right skill to use these gadgets. And while the training process has begun, it seems that the pandemic caught us at a time where we were, in between the learning process. And so how do we better prepare our teachers for new technology-driven learning environments? That is key, because if we are talking about now, we need for them to know what to do with this technology.
Teachers thought, and even schools, that technology is here to replace teachers in school. And that was a wrong mindset. And I think that was one of the things that made teachers reject technology before. But 2020 showed us that with a computer at home, you still needed the guidance of a teacher. And so this is a truth both to parents, to teachers, and even to schools. And with this, we need to focus now on teachers. We need to bring them to the mindset of the 21st century learner. And with this, we need first to change or to improve the methodology of learning, as I had mentioned before. Because you can teach for them to use a computer, how to write an email, how to take a video, but if they still use chalk and board and still take or record a video and send them to the students, we still will not have impact. We need to show them education technology tools that fit the learner. Finally, I'll talk about pre-service teachers. I know we have not mentioned them before. We need to go back to the root. We need to go back to teachers before they come into school. These teachings or this training need to be taught to pre-service teachers so that when they come in the system, they already know what they are teaching.
Joyce, we've heard people talk about how they are computer literate, but they're not techies. And in the education sector, this is common, undeniably as well. But how do we develop solutions that can help both those learning with data and those of them who are learning offline, given the previous infrastructure challenges we talked about?
We call technology an enabler, right? It's supposed to enable the process, but in and of itself, it's never a complete solution. So it's just supposed to facilitate. What are we facilitating here? We're facilitating learning. We're facilitating easy access to knowledge for the masses. So when we think that way, then it becomes about what is the reality of the people that we are trying to serve and how do we then reach them? And even as we think about that, I think globally, and I've had conversations actually with technology companies in Singapore, for example, who are building very interesting tech that allows you, even when you're on a browser, right? If your data drops or you don't have access to data, you continue to learn as if you are online. Can you imagine? I just discovered this and I thought, wow, so maybe we are thinking offline means completely offline, or offline means SMS, when out there, here is someone building a technology that you're still on your browser, you appear to be online, but when you're not, you can continue to learn.
But you did mention, yes, the environment might not be as conducive. So how do we make it conducive for you as the entrepreneurs who are providing solutions that the EdTech or the education sector can tap into? What would be the ideal conducive environment if this was to enable you as solution providers to flourish in the EdTech sector?
I was in a position last year where we were looking to partner with a major telecommunication provider to launch something interesting. And we literally stopped at the point where we realized that there's some content, sort of aggregator licenses needed. And as a startup founder, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't have 6 months or the resources to go through this, so I'll back away. And yet maybe I already had the solution and several other factors in place. So that's what I mean by gatekeeping, that if that hurdle wasn't there, maybe by now there would be another interesting solution or another large group of people accessing life-changing content through that partnership that we were working on. But we stopped it because at the point where I didn't have some particular aggregator licenses that were needed, we couldn't continue. That's a practical example, you see. So when I talk about environment, that's what I mean.
So could it be that also there needs to be more awareness amongst the EdTech entrepreneurs on what exactly needs to be done, the channels they need to go through? Because it's one thing to say that KICD is not really being fast enough or paced enough or going with the pace of the EdTech entrepreneurs. But then it's another thing to not have the right information so you're able to push through in the fastest process. Maybe it's just me saying it. Is it the ICT authority has come forward and said, look, we're open to receiving some of these content from the EdTech entrepreneurs, but they still have to go through KICD because until it's approved by KICD, nothing can be done.
Yeah, it's actually a great thing to have the content go through this review process, because one of the problems about the internet is this wild west where anything can go. It's equivalent to doing research on Wikipedia versus doing research on, let's say, Encyclopedia Britannica. You show that one set of content has already been reviewed and approved. So there is like a very central role that an organization like KICD does to an ecosystem that is still emerging, that doesn't have self-built mechanisms for ensuring that quality material reaches out to that parent. I mean, if you're thinking of the parent in Garissa or Kisumu, they need to have that guarantee that whatever content they're getting is going to be quality. And I'll refer to my experience. I mean, I've participated in EdTech communities, but I've also had conversations with schools. And when you visit the schools, they totally have no awareness of what's happening in this EdTech ecosystem. And when you meet with the practitioners within the EdTech ecosystem, they complain or they they complain that it's not possible to have these conversations with the public sector, be it the schools, be it the government. So I think if there was a lot more opportunity for conversation, there will be a lot more opportunity for people to mutually, both the government and the private sector, to build mutually beneficial solutions to the public.
Right. Okay. Wairimu, I'm bringing you in now because I would like for us to also talk about the fact that, while we're developing all of this content, we need to have in mind the fact that it's not just the teachers who would need to use these tools or these platforms or these technologies efficiently, but the parents also have a role that they're playing. If 2020 has taught us anything, is that the teachers have a role to play, but the parents also have a role to play here when it comes to EdTech. Because sometimes, for the better half of 2020, we did see that for most of the primary school learners, they needed to have someone right there on the side with them as they attended to their online classes. And if we're going to develop technology, it also needs to be user-friendly to those of them who are going to be assisting. So tell us about that as you also put this together with your final remarks.
Going forward, EdTech technology is a community effort. It needs to have schools, it needs to have government, it needs to have private organizations, and it needs to have parents all collaborating to make it work for learners. There needs to be a lot of support going from the government and the stakeholders. Isaac has mentioned about approval of content. The thing I'll just mention is for the EdTech themselves, we need to collaborate as EdTech companies in the country. One, we need to come up with solutions that are not imported and make fit. So we just, because when we go to the government with the imported and make fit solution, they might not work for the most disadvantaged learners in the society. So we need to collaborate and see our solutions and see how we can help one another in pushing for EdTech in the country. And at the same time, we need driven teachers. We need teachers for them to get these resources. We know they're not able to afford them, but once they are given these resources for free, they need to know that the end goal is to help their learners. So they need to take up these resources, they need to get trained, and they need to implement it in the classroom. And there will be an overall mindset in how we view EdTech in the country.
Joyce, I want to hear your final remarks here. Where do we go from here? And what are the quick wins? What can be solved? What can be implemented as soon as possible?
My strongest call to action always is to the individual. It's to each of us right now, because we're speaking about EdTech like it could be some far removed concept or nice theory on paper. But the practicality of it is right now, as you're sitting there, if you have a mobile phone, you need to start by asking yourself, when is the last time you went online to take a course? Can you try? Are you willing to just pick up your phone, search for an online course, go through those videos and say, wow, I've actually taken one training, one class online. This applies to the parents as well, because if you're not able to do that, how are you going to influence the next generation? How are you going to empower your children? So there are some aspects that are literally a catalyst if they shift. If we can make internet affordable, and I'm not talking about accessibility, I'm talking about affordability, make data bundles more affordable. That is one singular factor that would be a huge catalyst to accelerating that innovation and that drive with technology that we want to see in education.
Isaac, when it comes to, Wairimu and Joyce have talked about collaborations, but then going forward, what are some of the things that can be implemented immediately that you think can be taken up by the education sector to incorporate EdTech-enabled learning in the education sector?
The example that comes to mind is the building of boarding schools in pastoralist areas to ensure that kids are able to continue learning. So maybe we need something like that also within the education sector. And just to to highlight one thing that we didn't speak about as much. There's a lot of inequality already within our education system, and this inequality is also going to manifest itself in the digital realm. There's a lot of opportunities that all these institutions can come to ensure that that kid in Garissa or Marsabit has equal access to these learning opportunities as the child in Nairobi.
A great conversation we just had on driving tech-enabled education, the lessons we've picked out of 2020 that we can use this year and going forward. Thank you for being part of the EdTech Monday Kenya show, and thank you to the EdTech team here at the MasterCard Foundation that makes these conversations happen. Now, in case you would like to follow us, you can follow the Facebook page, that is the Young Africa Works page on Facebook, for more of this content on the EdTech conversations. Also, a reminder for our next month conversation that's going to be around enabling young women's leadership. What is the role of education technology in enabling young women's leadership? Be sure to follow that conversation on the 22nd of March 2021 right here, and we'll also be looking forward to your contributions as well. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and our sign language interpreter, Rose Amolo. Thank you.